It was supposed to be a perfect weekend. Emily and I had booked a cozy cabin for a romantic getaway, far from work, city noise, and distractions. The reviews promised peace, quiet, and breathtaking views. But when we pulled up to the cabin late Friday evening, things immediately felt off. The place looked decent enough at first, small, wooden, tucked into the woods like it was straight out of a travel ad. But there was no sign of life. No receptionist, no caretaker, no friendly host like the website had promised. "Maybe they're just late," I said, trying to reassure Emily. We stepped onto the porch, and that's when I noticed the front door. It was cracked open, swaying slightly with the breeze. "Hello?" I called out, pushing the door wider. The inside was clean but lifeless. Dust floated in the air, illuminated by the last light of the day coming through the windows. The furniture was simple, rustic, and untouched. Too untouched. "This doesn't feel right," Emily whispered, gripping my arm. "Relax," I said, though my own nerves were starting to itch. Maybe they just stepped out and we missed them. We moved inside. The air smelled faintly of pine, but also something sharper, metallic. I tried to brush it off as old cabin smell. "I'll check the kitchen," I said, heading toward the back. Emily stayed in the living room, fiddling with her phone. In the kitchen, everything looked normal at first glance. Plates stacked neatly, a kettle on the stove. But on the counter, there was a book, a diary. Its cover was plain and brown, the kind you'd find at any corner store. It was open to a page, and the handwriting was shaky and rushed. "Emily, come look at this," I called. She walked in, her face uneasy. "What is it?" I pointed to the diary. She leaned over and started reading aloud. "They come at night. I thought it was just one, but now I know there are more. They scratch at the windows, they knock on the door, they whisper my name. If anyone reads this, don't stay. Leave now, before it's too late." The room felt colder. Emily looked at me, her eyes wide. "Is this some kind of joke?" I shook my head. "I don't think so." She grabbed my arm again. "Mark, we need to leave." "Calm down," I said, though my own pulse was racing. "It's probably just a prank someone left to scare guests." Emily didn't look convinced, and honestly, neither was I. Still, I wasn't about to pack up and leave over a creepy diary. "Let me check around the cabin," I said. "Make sure everything's fine." I grabbed a flashlight from my bag and stepped outside. The woods were dense, the kind that swallowed sound. Even with the flashlight, the darkness felt heavy, pressing in from all sides. As I walked around the cabin, I looked for anything unusual. Tracks, broken windows, signs of someone lurking. Nothing. Just trees and silence. But the longer I stayed out there, the more I felt like I was being watched. Then I heard it, a faint knock. It came from the direction of the front porch. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. My throat tightened. "Emily," I called, hurrying back to the door. When I got inside, she was pacing in the living room, her phone in hand. "Mark, we have no signal. I can't call anyone." "Calm down," I said again, though my voice was shakier this time. "I didn't see anything out there. Let's just lock the doors and get through the night. We'll leave in the morning." Emily didn't argue, but her hands were trembling as she locked the door and drew the curtains. We tried to settle in. I lit a fire in the fireplace while Emily made some tea. The warmth helped, but the cabin still felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. I was dozing off on the couch when a loud bang jolted me awake. "What was that?" Emily whispered, clutching my arm. I grabbed the flashlight again and stood. "Stay here. Mark, don't—" "I'll be right back." The sound had come from the back of the cabin, near the kitchen. I crept toward it, every step heavier than the last. The flashlight beam trembled as I moved it across the walls. When I reached the kitchen, the door leading to the backyard was wide open. "That was locked," I whispered to myself. Before I could take another step, I heard the scratching. Faint at first, like nails on wood, then louder, closer. "Emily!" I yelled, running back to the living room. She was already at the front door, her coat in hand. "We're leaving. Now." I didn't argue. Grabbing the car keys, we bolted outside and ran to the car. The woods felt alive now, the silence replaced by rustling, snapping, and faint whispers I couldn't place. Once inside the car, I jammed the keys into the ignition and floored it. The tires screeched as we sped down the narrow dirt road, the cabin disappearing behind us. Neither of us spoke for a long time. My hands were shaking on the wheel, and Emily was staring out the window, pale and wide-eyed. "What was that?" she finally whispered. "I don't know," I admitted. We didn't stop driving until we reached the nearest town. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching us. Later, when I checked the booking site, the cabin was gone. No listing, no contact info, nothing. It was like it had never existed. I don't know who or what was out there that night. But one thing's for sure, we won't be making another last reservation anytime soon. 15 years ago, I began hiking this mountain trail, quickly becoming familiar with every turn, rock, and tree. Hiking has always been a passion of mine. But one day, while scaling a new section of the cliff, I spotted something strange. Hidden just off the path, under a tangle of branches and moss, was a dark, round opening. It looked like a tunnel. Curiosity got the better of me. The climb was going well, and I had plenty of time. I thought maybe it was just an old bunker or some sort of forgotten entrance, maybe even part of an old military installation. I didn't know why, but I felt drawn to it, like something inside was calling me. I carefully made my way down to the entrance. It was small, maybe 4 feet wide, and had a steel door that was barely hanging on its hinges. It wasn't locked, and it gave with a creak when I pushed it open. Inside, it was pitch black, and I could feel a cold draft swirling around me. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, but I stepped inside, my heart pounding with excitement. The air inside was stale, musty, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I shone my light around and saw that the walls were made of stone, rough and uneven, with rusted pipes running along the sides. The ground was damp, and there were strange marks on the floor, like someone had dragged something heavy across it, but it didn't look abandoned. The tunnel stretched deep into the mountain, far longer than I expected. I started walking, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the silence. The deeper I went, the colder it got. I thought I could hear faint sounds, shuffling maybe, or whispers, but I couldn't be sure. It felt like I was being watched, though I couldn't see anyone. As I walked, I found things that shouldn't have been there. Old wooden crates stacked against the walls, covered in dust, but clearly recently moved. There were old chairs and tables scattered about, some overturned. It looked like the place had been used recently. But by who? That's when I heard it, a faint scraping sound like something moving against the floor. I froze. The light from my flashlight flickered for a moment, casting long, unnerving shadows on the walls. I swung it around, trying to see if anyone was there, but all I saw was more of the same: stone walls, empty crates, and dust. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that it was probably just an animal or my imagination playing tricks. But then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the end of the tunnel, barely visible in the dim light, stood a figure. It was tall, thin, and dressed in a dark coat. He wasn't moving, just standing there, staring at me. I couldn't make out his face, but I could feel his eyes on me. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I took a step back, my hand gripping the flashlight tighter. I thought about turning around and running, but something held me in place. I didn't know why I stayed, maybe hoping the figure was just a trick of the light or some shadow from the tunnel. But the man didn't move. Then out of nowhere, he spoke. His voice was deep, low, almost a growl. "You shouldn't be here." A chill shot down my spine. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. He started moving toward me, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. Without thinking, I turned and bolted. I ran as fast as I could, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the flashlight bouncing wildly in my hand. I didn't look back. I just ran, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the tunnel as I raced toward the entrance. I could hear him behind me, the sound of heavy footsteps chasing me, getting closer with each passing second. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out. The entrance was still far ahead, but I wasn't sure I could make it. Then, just as I thought I couldn't run any longer, I saw the faint light from the entrance. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air. I heard the man's footsteps getting closer, faster now, and I knew he was right behind me. I burst out of the tunnel and into the fresh air, gasping for breath. The sunlight stung my eyes as I stumbled out onto the mountain path. I didn't stop to look back. I just kept running, pushing myself as fast as I could until I couldn't hear the footsteps anymore. Eventually, I found my way back to the main road. I didn't stop to rest. I didn't even look around. I just kept walking, my heart pounding in my chest. The image of that strange man still burned into my mind. What had he been doing there? Who was he? Why had he been in that tunnel? But no matter how many times I looked back, there was no sign of him. The tunnel was gone. It was like it never existed. I finally made it to the nearest town, exhausted and shaken, but I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I wasn't sure they'd believe me anyway. All I knew was that I was never going near that tunnel again. And I still wonder, who was that man and what had he wanted from me? It was Christmas Eve, and I had just finished tucking my kids into bed. Sarah, my 8-year-old, had left cookies and milk for Santa on the coffee table, while Timmy, only 5, insisted on hanging an extra stocking just in case Santa brought a friend. The house was quiet now, except for the soft hum of the furnace working against the biting cold outside. Snow had been falling steadily all evening, blanketing the neighborhood in a serene white stillness. I stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the empty street. It was picture perfect. After a long day of holiday prep, I still had one last task, assembling the kids' Christmas gifts. I set up shop in the living room, armed with a toolkit, wrapping paper, and instructions for a dollhouse and a toy truck. I switched on some Christmas music for company and got to work. The first hour passed uneventfully, though I cursed under my breath more than once at the tiny screws and poorly written instructions. Around midnight, I got up to stretch and grab a cup of coffee. That's when I noticed it, the faintest sound of footsteps above me. I froze, straining my ears. The kids' bedrooms were upstairs, and I just checked on them a half hour ago. Sarah was snoring lightly, and Timmy was curled up with his stuffed bear. Maybe one of them was up for a drink of water? But as I listened, the footsteps didn't seem to move toward the bathroom. They were slow, deliberate, almost heavy. "Sarah? Timmy?" I called out softly, not wanting to wake them if they were still asleep. No response. I tiptoed to the bottom of the stairs and listened again. The footsteps had stopped. The house was silent except for the faint hiss of the radiator. Telling myself I was imagining things, I went back to the living room. But the uneasy feeling stayed with me. I kept glancing at the doorway, half expecting someone to appear. About 15 minutes later, as I was attaching the final piece of the dollhouse roof, I heard it again. Footsteps. This time they were coming from the kitchen, just down the hall. My heart leapt into my throat. This wasn't my kids. These steps were too heavy, too deliberate. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a screwdriver, and crept toward the kitchen. The lights were off, but the faint glow from the living room spilled into the hallway. "Who's there?" I said, my voice shaking. No answer. I peeked into the kitchen. It was empty. The back door was locked just as I'd left it. But then I noticed something that sent a chill down my spine. The cookie plate on the counter was empty. Not just a bite taken, completely empty. I stepped closer and saw crumbs on the counter. A glass of milk had been knocked over, a small puddle pooling at the edge. Panic surged through me. Someone was in my house. I backed out of the kitchen and grabbed my phone from the coffee table. My hands shook as I unlocked it and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency?" the operator asked. "Someone's in my house," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Are you in a safe place?" I think so. My kids are upstairs and I'm in the living room." "Stay on the line. Officers are on their way. Can you hear or see anything unusual right now?" As if on cue, I heard another noise. This time it came from the front door. It was subtle, like the faint creak of hinges. "I think they're at the front door," I whispered. "Can you lock yourself in a room?" "I can't leave my kids," I said, glancing toward the staircase. "Stay calm. Officers will be there in 5 minutes. Stay quiet and stay where you are." I held my breath, clutching the screwdriver tightly. The house was eerily quiet again, but I felt eyes on me. My skin prickled, and every muscle in my body tensed. Then, just as I thought the silence would suffocate me, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow darted across the far wall, near the front window. My heart raced as I pressed myself against the wall, trying to stay hidden. Whoever it was, they were just outside the living room now. Suddenly, the soft sound of a door creaking open came from upstairs. My blood ran cold. The kids. I dropped the phone and bolted up the stairs, not caring about making noise anymore. "Get away from my kids!" I shouted, screwdriver in hand. I burst into Sarah's room first. She was still in bed, stirring groggily. "Daddy?" she mumbled. "Stay here," I said, my voice firm but quiet. I ran to Timmy's room next. He was sound asleep, clutching his bear. No sign of anyone. Heart pounding, I checked the hallway and the bathroom. Empty. But then I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. Wet footprints on the carpet leading from the stairs to Timmy's room, and back down again. I swallowed hard, my grip on the screwdriver tightening. Whoever had been in the house had just walked past my kids. Downstairs, I heard the faint wail of police sirens approaching. Relief washed over me. I ran back to the landing, hoping the noise would scare the intruder off. When I got back to the living room, the front door was wide open. Snow blew in, swirling around the footprints, leading out onto the porch and into the night. The police arrived moments later, sweeping the house and yard. They found no one. "Probably a burglar," one of the officers said. "Saw you were awake and decided to leave before things got worse." I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. Burglars don't eat cookies or sneak around quietly when the house is occupied. The officers left after making sure everything was secure, and I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room, screwdriver in hand, watching the front door. When morning came, the kids ran downstairs, excited to see what Santa had brought. I smiled for them, hiding the fear still knotted in my chest. I never told them what happened that night. But every Christmas Eve since, I've double-checked every lock and left no cookies out. Some traditions aren't worth the risk. I had been alone for years. Watching friends find love and settle down while I spent nights in front of the TV or scrolling through my phone was exhausting. So I decided to try online dating. That's how I met Claire. Her profile was perfect, almost too perfect. She loved hiking, old books, and cooking, just like me. Her messages were warm and funny, and I felt like I could talk to her about anything. After weeks of chatting, we agreed to meet in person. The day of our date, I was nervous but excited. We met at a little cafe. Claire looked even better in real life. Her long brown hair, bright smile, and kind eyes made me feel at ease. "Eric, it's so nice to finally meet you," she said, her voice soft and inviting. "You too, Claire," I replied, feeling my nerves melt away. The first date went perfectly. We laughed, shared stories, and talked for hours. It felt like we had known each other forever. She seemed to understand me in a way no one else ever had. But as we started seeing each other more, little things began to bother me. Claire seemed to know things I never told her. One day, she mentioned my childhood dog, Max. I froze. I hadn't told her about Max. "Did I tell you about him?" I asked. She smiled and waved it off. "You must have. You talk so openly, Eric." I nodded, but I didn't remember saying anything. Another time, she brought me my favorite coffee, exactly how I like it. I asked how she knew, and she laughed, saying, "You told me on our first date, silly." But I knew I hadn't. At first, I thought I was overthinking. Maybe I had shared more than I realized. But as time went on, her knowledge of me went beyond what was normal. She knew things I'd never shared with anyone, things I hadn't thought about in years. One night, she invited me to her house for dinner. It was a cozy little place on the edge of town, filled with candles and soft music. She cooked my favorite meal, which surprised me, but I didn't say anything. After dinner, she excused herself to the kitchen, and I wandered around, looking at her decorations. That's when I saw the locked door. Something about it felt wrong. The rest of the house was warm and inviting, but this door felt out of place, almost like it was hiding something. Curiosity got the better of me. I tried the handle. It was locked. "Eric?" Claire's voice called from behind me. I jumped, my heart racing. She was holding 2 glasses of wine, her smile tight. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Just looking around," I said quickly. "What's in here?" Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes darkened. "That's just my storage room. Nothing exciting." I nodded, but the unease stayed with me. Later that night, when she went to the bathroom, I noticed the key on her kitchen counter. My curiosity was unbearable. I grabbed it and slipped back to the locked door. The key fit perfectly. I turned it and pushed the door open, stepping inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the center of the room, was a life-size doll. It looked exactly like me. Same hair, same face, even the small scar above my eyebrow from when I fell off my bike as a kid. The doll was dressed in clothes I owned, and on its arm was the same tattoo I'd gotten in college, something I had never shared online or mentioned to Claire. My heart pounded as I backed away, nearly tripping over a box. Inside were photos of me, some taken recently, others from years ago. There were notes about my daily routine, my likes and dislikes. Eric, her voice came from the doorway. I turned to see her standing there, her face calm but her eyes blazing. "You weren't supposed to see this," she said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. What is this?" I stammered, pointing at the doll. She sighed like she was tired of hiding. "I've been watching you for years, Eric. Ever since I saw you at that coffee shop. You didn't notice me, but I noticed you." My stomach churned. "Years? What do you mean?" "I've always wanted someone like you," she said, her voice soft and almost loving, but had to wait for the right moment, so I made this. She gestured to the doll. It was a placeholder, something to keep me company until I could have the real you. My blood turned to ice. "You're crazy." Her face twisted into a frown. "Don't say that, Eric. I love you. You love me too. You just don't realize it yet." She stepped closer, and I realized she was holding something. Syringe. "Stay back," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't let you leave," she said, her voice breaking. "If you leave, I'll lose everything. Don't you see? We're meant to be together." Adrenaline kicked in. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy lamp, and swung it at her. She cried out and dropped the syringe. I didn't wait to see if she was okay. I ran. I sprinted out of the house and into the night, not stopping until I reached my car. My hands shook as I fumbled for the keys, but I managed to start the engine and speed away. For days, I was too scared to leave my apartment. I blocked her number and deleted my dating profile. Eventually, I went to the police. They searched her house but found nothing. No doll, no photos, no sign of Claire. It was like she had vanished. Even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that she's still out there, watching me. But I'm alive. I escaped, and I'll never trust a stranger again. That night taught me one thing. Some people's love is a trap, and it's better to be alone than caught in their web. It was New Year's Eve, and my family and I were on our way to my in-laws' house for the annual holiday celebration. Lisa, my wife, and our 2 kids, Ben and Emma, were all in the car, excited for the evening ahead. Food, games, and of course, celebrating the start of a new year. The atmosphere was full of holiday cheer, but I could tell Lisa was feeling a little nervous. We had been driving for over an hour, and the snowstorm outside made the journey feel much longer. The wind howled, and the snow fell thick and fast, turning the road into a slippery mess. Normally, the drive to my in-laws' place took about an hour, but tonight it was taking much longer because of the weather. We lived in a small town, and my in-laws lived in a bigger city. The highways were jammed with cars moving at a crawl, and the country roads were barely visible under the snow. Frustration grew as we inched forward in traffic. I knew it would be another hour before we arrived. As we approached a fork in the road, I noticed a sign I'd seen countless times but never paid much attention to before. It read, "Shorter road, 12 miles." It was an old country road that cut through the woods. Though I'd never taken it, I'd heard from a few people that it was a faster way into the city. "Well, it's worth a shot," I said, looking over at Lisa. "We've been stuck here long enough. We might save some time by taking the shortcut." Lisa looked hesitant, her face showing a mix of worry and doubt. "I don't know, honey. This weather? Are you sure it's a good idea?" "Don't worry, it's just a shortcut. We'll be fine," I said, trying to sound confident. "We've been on this road for an hour already. If it saves us time, let's just take it." She sighed but didn't argue further. We were all eager to get to my in-laws' house, and honestly, I was tired of being stuck in traffic. I turned onto the narrow road. The trees lined both sides, their bare branches heavy with snow. At first, it looked peaceful, like something out of a holiday postcard. But the deeper we went, the more eerie it became. The snow fell harder, and the winding road grew slick. I had to focus on keeping the car on course. "Are you sure we're still going the right way?" Lisa asked nervously. glancing at the snow-covered path ahead. Yeah, it's just a little further. It's fine, I reassured her, though doubt had started creeping into my mind. The further we drove, the more isolated the area felt. Houses disappeared, replaced by dense woods on both sides. The only sounds were the crunch of the tires on the snow and the occasional gust of wind. Then I saw it, a car parked off to the side of the road, half hidden by snow and trees. Its headlights were off, and the windows were fogged up. It looked like no one was inside. "Why is that car just sitting there?" Lisa asked, staring at it. "I don't know," I said, slowing down. The car looked abandoned, but something about it made me uneasy. As we passed, I scanned the area for any sign of movement. "Maybe it broke down," I offered, though I wasn't convinced. "It feels off," Lisa muttered, glancing nervously out her window. "Should we stop?" "No, we're fine," I said quickly, pressing the accelerator. "We're on a time crunch, remember?" As we continued driving, I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. The car quickly disappeared from view in the rearview mirror, but something made me glance back one more time. That's when I noticed them. Footsteps in the snow, fresh tracks leading away from the car and into the woods. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding for a moment before I regained control. My heart raced as I stared back at the tracks. "Lisa, look." She followed my gaze and gasped. "Those footprints. Who would be out here?" The snow had been falling heavily all night, yet the footprints were clear and fresh. Whoever had left them couldn't have been far. I squinted into the darkness of the woods, and that's when I saw it, a silhouette. A man's shadow stood just beyond the tree line, barely visible but unmistakably there, watching us. "Do you see him?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Lisa nodded, her face pale. "Let's get out of here, John." I didn't need any more convincing. I pressed the accelerator, my hands gripping the wheel tightly as we sped away. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what we'd seen. Why was that car abandoned? Who had left those footprints? And why was someone standing in the woods watching us? The snowfall intensified, making it harder to see the road ahead. The eerie feeling deepened, and I couldn't stop thinking about the shadow by the car. Why would someone be out here, in the middle of nowhere during a snowstorm? And why had they been standing so still? The road seemed endless, stretching into the dark. The snow muffled everything, leaving only the crunch of the tires and the occasional creak of the trees. Finally, after what felt like hours, we reached a small clearing. In the distance, I spotted a farmhouse, its windows glowing warmly. "There!" I said, relieved. "We're almost there." I pulled over for a moment to catch my breath, glancing around. The shadow by the car was gone from my mind for a moment, replaced by the welcoming sight of the farmhouse. Gathering myself, I started the car again and drove toward the lights. Eventually, we made it to my in-laws' house. The warmth of their home was a relief, but the memory of the abandoned car, the fresh footprints, and the shadow by the road lingered in my mind. Even as we laughed and celebrated the new year, I couldn't shake the unease. Some roads are better left unexplored. My name is Maria, and I'm 32 years old. I live alone in a small, cozy house just outside the city. It's quiet here, which I like. I work from home as a graphic designer, so I'm in the house most of the day. My life is simple, and I like it that way. But last summer, something happened that changed everything, at least for a while. It all started with a jammed lock on my back door. I couldn't open it properly, and it made me feel uneasy. After struggling with it for a few days, I decided to call a locksmith. His name was David, and he came recommended by a neighbor. David seemed pleasant enough at first. He looked to be in his late 40s, with graying hair and a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As he walked in, he immediately began commenting on my house. "Nice place you've got here," he said, glancing around. "Bet it's cozy living alone, huh?" I nodded politely, though his words made me a little uncomfortable. He started working on the lock, fiddling with his tools, and muttering about how some people don't know what they're doing when installing locks. "But not to worry," he added with a grin. "I can fix anything." While he worked, he asked me a series of random, almost intrusive questions. "How long have you lived here? Do you have family nearby? What's your favorite thing about the neighborhood?" I answered vaguely, trying to focus on my work at the kitchen table. After about 30 minutes, he announced that the lock was fixed. I tested it, and while it seemed better, it still stuck a little. "It's probably just old hardware," he said. "I'll come back tomorrow with a better replacement. Don't worry, I'll take care of you." True to his word, David returned the next day with new parts. He spent more time on the lock this time, muttering to himself and occasionally glancing my way. When he finished, the lock worked perfectly. "See? Told you I'd fix it," he said, packing up his tools. "If you ever need anything else, just call me. I can handle all kinds of repairs." "Thank you," I replied with a polite smile, eager for him to leave. Over the next few days, I ran into David a couple of times, once at the supermarket and once while I was out jogging. Each time, he seemed overly friendly. At the supermarket, he waved excitedly and walked over to my cart. "Hey, Maria, stocking up, huh?" he said, peering into my groceries. "Looks like you're a coffee lover. Me too." I laughed nervously and kept the conversation short. Something about him felt weird, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. At the same time, I couldn't deny that there was a strange, almost magnetic quality to his attention. I caught myself wondering if he was lonely or just awkward, and despite my unease, I felt a small twinge of pity for him. But then, things at home started to feel strange. One evening, I noticed that my back door, the one David had worked on, was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it. I double-checked and convinced myself I must have been careless. But over the next week, more unsettling things happened. A chair in the living room was moved. My favorite coffee mug disappeared from the kitchen. And one night, I heard faint creaking sounds like someone walking across the floorboards. By now, I was on edge. I decided to install a security camera in the living room, facing the main entryway. For 2 nights, the footage showed nothing unusual. But on the third night, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Around 2 a.m., the camera captured movement. A man entered through the back door, quietly and confidently, like he belonged there. He walked into the living room and stood still, staring at the couch for several minutes. Then he moved toward the hallway leading to my bedroom. Thankfully, he didn't enter. After a few more minutes, he left the way he came. I recognized him immediately. It was David. My stomach dropped. He must have made a copy of my house key while working on the lock. That's why he had access. I felt violated and terrified. I knew I had to act quickly, but I was too scared to confront him directly. Instead, I called the police and showed them the footage. The officers took my report seriously and advised me to stay somewhere else while they investigated. I packed a bag and went to stay with my friend Lisa. That night, I barely slept. I couldn't stop thinking about David standing in my living room, his eyes fixed on the couch as if imagining me there. The next day, the police informed me they had located David and brought him in for questioning. At first, he denied everything, but when confronted with the video evidence, he confessed. He admitted to making a copy of my key and letting himself into my house several times. He claimed he was just checking on me and meant no harm, but that didn't make his actions any less horrifying. David was arrested and charged with breaking and entering, as well as stalking. The police assured me he wouldn't be able to bother me again. Still, I knew I needed to take extra precautions. I hired a professional to replace all the locks in my house and installed a comprehensive security system with motion detectors and cameras in every room. It cost a fortune, but I didn't care. My safety was worth it. I was broke. College tuition, rent, and food had drained my bank account to almost nothing. Finals were around the corner and I couldn't focus on studying because I was too stressed about money. So, when I saw a Craigslist ad offering $500 for a day of holiday decorating at some rich family's mansion, I jumped on it. The ad was vague. Help needed to decorate large home for Christmas. No experience necessary. Must be reliable. Pay $500 for 1 day of work. It sounded too good to be true, but I didn't have the luxury of being picky. I sent an email and got a reply within the hour. The address was in a wealthy neighborhood I'd only ever seen on TV, and the woman who responded, Mrs. Calloway, said she was excited to have me help. The day of the job, I put on my best sweater, trying to look presentable, and took the bus to their neighborhood. The houses were enormous, like something out of a movie. Perfect lawns, stone driveways, and Christmas lights already strung up on the roofs. When I got to the Calloway house, I stopped and stared. It was the biggest house on the street, a white colonial with columns in the front and a towering Christmas tree visible through the window. I felt out of place just standing there. I rang the doorbell, and Mrs. Calloway answered. She was tall, with perfectly styled hair and a wide smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Adam," she said, looking me up and down. Come in, come in." I stepped inside, and the warmth hit me. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine, and every surface gleamed. Mrs. Calloway led me to the living room, where her husband, Mr. Calloway, sat on a leather couch. He was a big man with a deep voice and a firm handshake. "Thanks for coming," he said. "We've got a lot to do." They didn't waste time. Mrs. Calloway handed me a list of tasks: stringing lights, hanging ornaments, arranging garlands. The first few hours were fine, even pleasant. The house was beautiful, and I felt lucky to be earning so much money for something so simple. But as the day went on, things started to feel off. For one, I never saw their kids. Mrs. Calloway had mentioned in her email that she needed help because her children were too young to reach the high places, but the house was dead silent. No laughter, no toys lying around. When I asked about them, Mrs. Calloway's smile tightened. "They're with the nanny," she said quickly, then changed the subject. Then there was the way they watched me. At first I thought I was imagining it, but every time I turned around, one of them was there, just looking. Mr. Calloway lingered in the doorway while I worked, his arms crossed. Mrs. Calloway floated around, pretending to tidy up, but always staying within earshot. By the time it got dark, I was on edge. Around 6 p.m., Mrs. Calloway brought me a plate of cookies and a glass of milk. "Take a break," she said, her voice sweet. "You've earned it." I didn't want to seem rude, so I sat down and took a bite of a cookie. It tasted fine, but something about the way she watched me made my stomach turn. "Thanks," I said, setting the plate down after just one bite. "You don't like them?" she asked, her smile frozen. "No, they're great," I lied. "I'm just not that hungry." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment before she nodded. "Well, let us know if you need anything." She and Mr. Calloway left the room, and I felt a wave of relief. But as I stood up to get back to work, I noticed something under the couch, a piece of paper, crumpled and torn. I bent down and picked it up. It was part of a handwritten note, the edges stained with something dark. The writing was shaky, but I could make out a few words. "Help, trapped, please." My heart raced. I stuffed the note in my pocket and tried to calm myself. Maybe it was nothing, just an old piece of paper that didn't mean anything. But the more I thought about it, the more it didn't add up. The silent house, the missing kids, the way they were always watching me. I decided it was time to leave. I found Mrs. Calloway in the dining room, arranging a centerpiece. "Hey, I think I'm done for the day," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's getting late, and I've got an early class tomorrow." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, but there's still so much to do. We're paying you for a full day, remember?" "I know, but I can come back tomorrow if you need more help," I said, backing toward the door. Before she could respond, Mr. Calloway appeared behind me. "Everything okay?" he asked, his deep voice making the hair on my neck stand up. "Yeah," I said quickly. "I just need to head out." He exchanged a look with Mrs. Calloway, then smiled. "Of course, let me get your coat." I waited by the door, my pulse pounding. When Mr. Calloway came back, he wasn't holding my coat. Instead, he was holding a heavy, old-fashioned padlock. "What's that for?" I asked, my voice shaking. "For the basement," he said, his smile widening. "We don't want you wandering down there." I bolted for the door, but Mrs. Calloway was faster. She slammed it shut, blocking my way. Now, she said, her voice still calm. "There's no need to leave so soon. We've got one last task for you." "Let me go," I shouted, but Mr. Calloway grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. He dragged me down the hallway toward a door I hadn't noticed before. It was small and unassuming, but when he opened it, a rush of cold air hit me. The basement. Fought against him, but he was too strong. He shoved me down the stairs, and I stumbled, hitting the concrete floor hard. The door slammed shut above me, the sound of the padlock clicking into place echoing in the darkness. The basement was pitch black, the air damp and cold. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam illuminated a small, cluttered room filled with storage boxes and old furniture. But as I moved the light, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A cage. It was shoved against the far wall, big enough to hold a person. Inside, a woman sat huddled, her face pale and hollow. She looked up when she saw the light, her eyes wide with fear. "Help me," she whispered. "Please." I rushed over and tried to pull the cage door open, but it was locked. "Who are you? What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. "They tricked me," she said, "just like they tricked you." I didn't have time to ask more questions. Footsteps thudded on the stairs, and I turned to see Mr. Calloway coming down, holding a length of rope. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a rusted pipe from the floor, and swung it as hard as I could. It hit him in the side of the head, and he dropped with a groan. I didn't wait to see if he'd get back up. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding, and threw myself against the door. It didn't budge. "Adam," Mrs. Calloway called from the other side, her voice icy. "Be a good boy and come back down." I ignored her and slammed my shoulder into the door again and again until the wood splintered. Finally, it burst open, and I ran out of the house without looking back. I called the police as soon as I was safe, and they raided the house later that night. They found the woman in the basement, along with evidence that the Calloways had been luring people in for years. I don't know what they planned to do to me, and I don't want to know. I never answered a Craigslist ad again. It all started with the most exciting day of my life. I hit 100,000 followers on Instagram, a milestone I'd been chasing for years. I'd built my brand carefully, travel photos, cute coffee shops, workout routines, my life curated perfectly for strangers to admire. When the notification popped up, my heart raced. 100,000 people cared about my life, or so I thought. To celebrate, I posted a story. "Thank you for 100K. Couldn't have done it without you. Let me know in the comments what kind of content you want to see next." The engagement was immediate. Hundreds of likes, DMs pouring in. Most were the usual. "Congrats. Love your content. Can't wait for your next post." But one stood out. Watcher 1. "Congrats. I've been watching for a while. Can't wait to see you at your coffee spot tomorrow." At first, I didn't think much of it. My usual coffee shop was no secret. I tagged it all the time. But something about the wording made me uneasy. Watching for a while, it felt personal. I brushed it off, probably just a weird way of saying they're a fan. The next morning, I went to my usual spot. As I sat with my latte, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time someone walked past the window, my eyes darted up. The barista handed me my drink with a smile. "Popular today, huh?" he said, nodding toward the window. I turned and saw someone snapping a photo of me from outside. My stomach flipped. I told myself it was harmless, a fan recognizing me, maybe wanting a candid shot. But that afternoon, I got a DM. "Watcher, nice latte. Hope it wasn't too bitter." How did they know what I ordered? My post didn't show the drink, just a selfie from my usual table. Panic bubbled up, but I rationalized it. Maybe they saw me in the shop and guessed. Maybe, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Over the next week, Watcher One's messages grew more frequent. They commented on my posts with uncanny accuracy, describing things that weren't in the photos. The color of my jacket, the street I took to get there. I stopped tagging my locations in real time, hoping to throw them off, but it didn't help. One night, I received a message that froze me in my tracks. "Watcher 1, you should lock your windows." I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through Instagram. My heart hammered as I looked at the window. It was open, wide open. I ran across the room and slammed it shut, drawing the curtains tightly. My hands shook as I typed back. "Who are you? How do you know where I live?" No response. Hours passed, and I stared at my phone, waiting, dreading. Finally, another message arrived. "Watcher 1, you share everything, don't you? It's not hard to find someone who's always online." I blocked the account immediately and spent the rest of the night double-checking my locks. The next morning, I woke up to a new notification, a follow request from Watcher 2. My stomach dropped. They weren't going to stop. I told a friend about it, hoping for reassurance. "You've probably just got a creepy fan," she said. "Ignore them. They'll get bored and move on." But they didn't. The new account started tagging me in posts, photos of me taken from a distance, at the gym, walking my dog, once from outside my apartment building. Each caption was worse than the last. Close, but not close enough. Do you see me yet? I'm always watching. I went to the police, but without direct threats, they couldn't do much. Block them, the officer said. Be cautious. Maybe take a break from social media for a while. Take a break? Social media was my life, my livelihood. How could I just stop? But the fear was becoming unbearable. I started posting less, avoiding public places. My world shrank to the walls of my apartment, and even there, I didn't feel safe. One night, I came home to find a package on my doorstep. No name, no return address. Inside was a framed photo of me, taken that morning. I hadn't posted anything that day. My hands trembled as I turned the frame over. On the back was a single word: soon. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound felt like a threat, every shadow a figure. I decided to go offline completely. Deleted my accounts, changed my number, moved to a new apartment. For a while it worked. The messages stopped. The posts disappeared. I started to feel like I could breathe again. Months later, I was out with friends, laughing over dinner, when my phone buzzed. A new notification. My heart stopped. It was from a brand new account. Watcher 3, congrats on starting over. Let's see how long it lasts.